Hi, folks. We're back at the Harbinger podcast. It's been a minute. For those who've been following since 2017, thank you for your support throughout the years. And for new joiners, welcome to the show. Some of you might know, I spent COVID years primarily in Taiwan as a refugee of sorts. One thing led to another, and I ended up launching a company called MetaTheory with several friends. Startup life can be all-consuming, and I didn't get to post as much as I did before. So special thanks to my dear friend Sandy Diao for encouraging me to create new content. And not just that, but in video form. So it's first time, let's see how it goes, and maybe I can convince her to join me and co-host some of these sessions moving forward. That'd be super fun. As always, there are so many excellent founders in Asia, and even today we rarely hear about their stories. So we'll try to capture these one podcast at a time, and let's jump right into it. Okay, so today we have an incredible guest and good friend of the pod, Kai Huang, who's the co-founder of RedOctane, which produced the game Guitar Hero. Guitar Hero is a pretty iconic game. It became a cultural phenomenon and left an indelible mark on the gaming and music industries. Guitar Hero was the best-selling game of the decade between 2000 and 2010. And in fact, Guitar Hero 3 sold over $1 billion worth. It held reign firmly as the highest grossing video game of all time for 6 years, until it was eventually surpassed by Call of Duty. Kai's journey is a fascinating one. From his early experiences that shaped his entrepreneurial mindset, to co-founding RedOctane, bootstrapping a business, and ultimately building one of the most successful gaming franchises of all time. So we'll hear directly from Kai's perspective, dive into how Guitar Hero came to be and its explosive growth, the decision to sell to Activision, and what it was like navigating the opportunities and challenges in this space at the highest level. Beyond Guitar Hero, Kai has also continued to explore new frontiers in startups, investing, and technology. So, these days, Kai spends much of his time in Taiwan, especially post-COVID. So we'll briefly delve into his findings and insights into the Taiwanese startup scene. This is a conversation packed with lessons on innovation, scaling a business, and navigating the ever-changing technology landscape. Let's jump in. Welcome to the podcast. It's great to have you here.
It's great to be here. Thanks, Adam.
No problem. So we're going to cover a lot of topics today, but let's start with your story. Can you share a bit more about who you are, where you're from, and how this all come to be?
How much time do we have on this podcast? Just kidding. I'll start from the beginning. I was born in Taiwan, and my family moved to the U.S. When I was 4, and that part will have a little bit more relevance when I talk about sort of later in my career and what I'm doing now. But I pretty much grew up in the U.S. and mostly in Silicon Valley. I lived in Mountain View, which is now the home of Google, so sort of the heart of Silicon Valley. And I kind of grew up in that tech environment. My parents were not in tech. They were immigrants from Taiwan, and they were doing what immigrants typically do. Initially, they opened up a grocery store or supermarket. Eventually, they went into trade and trading. And so even though they weren't in tech, we were still surrounded by it. Having grown up in Silicon Valley from the early 80s, all the way through now. So by the time I was about to go to college, my dad was, he was a great mentor for me in many ways. Not sort of a direct, mentor, but he always had a lot of great advice that I took from him. And one of the things that I took from him was he always said, because he was in business, Kai, graduate college, get a job, work at a big company. That's fine. That's what he did. But at some point in your life, you want to own your own business. And I thought, sounds interesting. It wasn't something that I'd always wanted to do, but, you hear that enough, and it was just something that always stuck in the back of my mind. So I went to college. I went to UC Berkeley, I graduated with a computer science degree with a business minor. So I was really interested in both. I was actually more interested in business, quite honestly, than I was in computer science, but I ended up majoring in computer science. And I thought I'd graduate, I would go work at a consulting company or investment banking, and then go back to business school, go back to get my MBA. And then I'd work for a few more years, and then maybe I'd start a company after that. Very typical path. I graduated college. I did end up working at a consulting company. I went to Anderson Consulting, which is Accenture today. And after 4 years, I really loved the work. I enjoyed the job. Um, but a lot of my friends were already going back to get their MBA at that time, or they totally burned out and, they went to like Greenpeace or something like that. Those are the two tracks, right? And for me, that was in the late 90s, 1998, 99, right when the internet boom started. And in my head, I was thinking, well, I could go get my MBA, or let me, jump into this, internet world right now, which is just starting. And if that didn't work, I could always go back and get my MBA. So that was really the beginning of my entrepreneurial career, was, when the internet wave first started. And since then, I've done my own companies. Never went back and got my MBA, but I did end up to today, I've started 5 companies, and all of them are very different. They have a similar theme through all of them, but they're all quite different, and in different fields. I spent most of my time in the gaming industry. RedOctane was the name of the company, and Guitar Hero was our most famous product, the product we were most well known for. And so that's kind of where I spent the bulk of my working career. But as I said, I've also done a lot of other different companies that were quite interesting as well.
Right. Yeah. So what was the first company you started, Kai? Was that RedOctane or was it something else?
It was not RedOctane. It was a company called Adux Software, which nobody will have ever heard of. This was in 1998. There were 4 of us founders, myself, my brother, and 2 other friends. And we ended up making server appliance software. So back then, today the technology is quite simple. But back then, when people were still trying to get on the internet or the interwebs, they really had no other way to do it other than dial up. Back in those days, it was like, oh, AOL, right? Or you had to sign on with a telephone company for some super expensive T1 line. And only big companies did that. So small offices, if you can believe this, if you had a small office of like 20, 30 people, they would get like 20 to 30 AOL accounts, and everybody would be dialing up on a modem. And that's how offices were getting online. And so what we thought an opportunity was to create a server appliance software. So router with firewall with caching for performance. And back then, that was something that was really new, or at least reserved for only, very, very big companies. And nobody else had that. So that was our first company, Adux Software.
Okay. All right. So you started that company and how did it do? At some point there's a company that came along that built Guitar Hero, but like what did it take to get there?
The first company was Adux Software, and that was a year before we ended up selling it off. I think we were too young. We started the company, we built the product, we just didn't know how to sell it. And so, I was 27 at the time when I first started my company. That was young back then. Today it's old to start a company, but back then that was pretty young, and it just didn't have the experience to sell it. So after we sold the product off to a different company, my brother and I jumped out and we decided to start thinking about, hey, let's do another company together. And we landed on online video game rentals. So back then, video game rentals were done through video rental companies like Blockbuster and Hollywood Video, right? Which back then were like massive brand names, but today they're completely gone thanks to Netflix, right? And they were the only ones, they rented movies, and they were the only ones that rented games. So Netflix was just starting at the time, and they were shipping games by mail. That's how Netflix started, right? Shipping DVDs by mail. And we thought, well, no one's focused on the video game space. Netflix was not doing games, and there was nobody doing it online. And Hollywood Video and Blockbuster rented games, but that wasn't their primary business. They were trying to rent movies, right? And then they had a back section, with like 2 shelves of video games, so that when parents went in to rent movies, the kids might go back there and rent some games. And so that's where we initially started the company, RedOctane. It's called webgamezone.com at the time, back when .com and the name was actually cool. And that's how we started online video game rentals.
Got it. So, Netflix up games before Netflix has games today, and you guys were doing that in the early days. Then, how did building music games come about? Was an idea came out of the blue one day? You guys were playing other musical games, or was it kind of was there a method to the madness? Was it something that came up as you guys were building out the company? How did that come about?
I think like most startups, we went through like a lot of pivots and ups and downs and ups and downs. And we started with online game rentals. We raised $1 million from friends and family. That was our first round of funding. And that got us started. But we quickly realized that renting video games online was a very capital intensive business. We had to go out and buy the games, and then you had to rent them and get your money back over time. So it's a very capital intensive business. And we were definitely burning through capital. And we were thinking, okay, we have to figure out a way to generate more revenue. One of the games that we were renting at the time was Dance Dance Revolution, a music game where you're sort of simulating dancing. Still very popular today, actually. And we were renting that game, and customers were asking us, hey, you rent the game, but do you rent or sell the dance pads? Because you need these dance pad accessories to play the game. And for months, we basically told them, no, we just rent games online. We don't do anything with dance pads and hardware. You'll have to find that somewhere else. And when we started feeling the financial pitch and we had to generate revenue, well, customers are asking about these dance pads. And one of our interns, because we hired a lot of interns back at the time, one of our interns had actually sold dance pads in the past. It was like, well, I could help you guys do this. So, okay, well, we need to start figuring out how to generate revenue. So that's when we first started selling dance pads. That was about a year into RedOctane, slightly under a year, or into webgamezone.com at the time, but slightly under a year into RedOctane. And we just decided to resell these dance pads really as a convenience for customers and generating some revenue. So we bought them locally for $15 from a local distributor, and we resold online for $30 on our website. And we thought, well, margins, pretty good there, right? And pretty easy. With online game rentals, you have to actually ship 2 ways. I have to get it to you, and then I have to get it back from you. And it was always kind of the getting it back to you that was a little tougher than getting it to you. So that complicated the logistics of the business a little bit. But hey, selling dance pads, it's like I ship it to you, and mostly we're done, right? Unless you have a problem. So it's actually easier to do, direct commerce like that.
Right.
So after 6 months of selling these dance pads, we were doing some grassroots marketing. We got some traction. We did some more grassroots marketing, got some more traction. And we thought, hey, we've got a small little cottage business selling dance pads here. We're getting a lot of feedback because we sold direct to consumer. They're telling us, hey, this is these are the features, we wish you guys, could build in, or they break, and we look at that and say, how do we make better product? So we took all of that feedback. Plus, as I mentioned, we hired a lot of interns because, what 18 to 20-year-old, kid wouldn't want to work at a game company. So it was easy for us to get a lot of interns. And they played the game. So they had a lot of ideas. So we took all of these ideas. So, well, why don't we make our own dance pad? A better one. So end of 2000, that was when we decided, okay, let's figure out how to make our own dance pad. So we came up with the product design. My brother, co-founder, Charles, had some experience with, international manufacturing and manufacturing in China. And he did the literal proverbial, went to China, opened up the Yellow Pages, their version of Yellow Pages. Okay, let's find the manufacturer. And hey, here's what we're looking for. And so all of a sudden, just over a year after we started the company, we're renting games, then we're reselling dance pads, and then all of a sudden we're selling dance pads now. And, the interesting thing when we decided to start selling our own dance pads, we called it the RedOctane dance pad. Very, very clever name there. We called it the RedOctane dance pad. We were still renting games online. That was our primary business, but we were selling these dance pads. And when we actually went directly to the manufacturer in the factory to get these products built, not only were they better, but our cost of goods went from 15 down to 8, so half the price. And we resold these third-party products at 30, and we were trying to figure out pricing ourselves. Well, what should we sell these dance pads for? We were originally going to just sell them at 30. We're like, well, same price, right? Same price as all the other third-party accessories. Konami, who was the first party, sold their dance pads at $40. So they sold theirs at a premium. All the third parties sold at a discount, which is fairly common. When we were about to do that, and literally a week before our products landed, because it takes 3 weeks to ship products from China on a container, we decided, hey, before we go out with the $30 pricing, there's a couple of things, in retail. One is we think we have a better product. So pricing signals quality. So, we think that we should be able to command a better price. And if we have a higher price, people will think it's a higher quality, especially if that's what we're claiming in our marketing. And then secondly, you can always take the price down, but it's very difficult to take the price up. So we're like, well, instead of selling it at 30 and first parties at 40, we think we're better than all of them. Well, let's launch it at 50 and see what happens. So we went from buying at 15, selling at 30 to buying at 8, and now selling direct to consumer at 50. So our margins expanded significantly. And we thought, well, let's give it a try. If it doesn't work, you can always reduce the price. So we launched our first product that we made, the RedOctane dance pad, at that $50 price. And at least within that small little cottage world at the time of Dance Revolution players, they loved it. They loved the product. And so there was good word of mouth. And that's how we really kind of got started into the accessories business, right? So we're still renting games online. That's what we're telling, potential investors, VCs in, Silicon Valley, because we knew they didn't want to invest in a dance pad, company. The sexier business was, hey, revolutionary business model, renting games online. But the reality was all of our profits, 95% of our profits was coming from selling these dance pads back in those days.
Right. Oh, wow. Okay. That's interesting. So just make sure I get it right. So you guys did raise a little bit of money from friends and family. Was it, is it about $1 million? Was it 100K? I didn't quite catch that.
It was $1 million initially, and then we did raise a second round from that same initial group of investors for another 800. And actually, that was the only money we raised in the life of the company. We tried to raise more later, but we never could.
I see. Well, we'll get to the, the investment and the return and all of that a little bit later. But just back to business up. You raised some money. You guys had a business model. We started generating more revenue and profit from the dance pads themselves. And you're saying that you manufactured them for, was under $10 and you're selling them for $50. So, okay, so that's pretty incredible margin, over 80%. like, was there any reaction in the market? Did other competitors notice this and try to their pricing approach or positioning, or like, how did that play out?
Yeah, what we didn't know at that time, because we were new to the game industry, we were on the periphery of the game industry, right? The core was publishing games, making games, software. Then, sort of after that, it was making hardware and accessories and peripherals, and then renting games was like really on the periphery of the game space. What we didn't know about our margin at the time, especially with the RedOctane dance pad, and then another product, the RedOctane Ignition dance pad later, was that we were actually making more margin on our hardware than software developers were making on their software. And the reason was because first party, Sony, Microsoft, Nintendo take a royalty. And once they took their royalty, no, it's still fantastic margin, but our actual margin on the hardware was significantly better. And that was sort of an eye opener for us once we learned that.
Right.
And from that first product, I mentioned sort of the high margin, but the next major product that we introduced, the RedOctane Ignition dance pad, that one sold for the cost of goods was cost us $15. We initially sold that for $130. So we went even higher end with an even higher margin product.
Right.
And at the time we knew, or our thesis was that gamers had a lot of money. They were willing to spend it. There just wasn't high quality peripherals and products out there for them. There wasn't really anyone focused on making high end products. And what we realized was that our competitors tried to copy us in pricing and in product. Literally, one company sent our product to the manufacturer, to our manufacturer, and said, "Can you copy this product?" They didn't know that manufacturer made the product for us, but our manufacturer told us, "Hey, another company sent your product to us and said they wanted to copy your product." But they tried, and they couldn't get the same margins. And part of the reason was that, I always think of RedOctane that we were a marketing company. We made products, and we eventually went into publishing and made video games. But, making products wasn't necessarily what we were best at. What we were, I think, really good at was understanding what consumers wanted. And we were direct to consumer from the beginning, and, very close to the consumer. That was always very important to us. And that gave us a really good pulse on what consumers wanted, rather than being, let's say, distanced because there's a retailer in between you and the final customer. So competitors tried to copy us. The reason I say we're a marketing company is, we understood what the consumer wanted, and we were willing to spend money to make a higher end product. And, when I say, spend money, when you're going to China and you're manufacturing in volume, on a $15 product, adding $1 cost of goods gave you a fairly significant increase in quality. And so we were willing to spend that dollar if we thought, hey, this is what we think the customers want. This is what they're telling us. We were willing to spend that dollar. Whereas our competitors had no clue. They were not marketing companies. They didn't know. They were just trying to copy us. But what they were trying to do was shave 50 cents off of a product, right? They're trying to get the product at the lowest possible cost. And they don't understand why putting that extra dollar in would make the difference. And I think that was one of the key learnings for us, is that being close to the customer, we felt like we had a real pulse. And so to us, when we're selling, high margin, high end products, where, gross margin was 90%, we could afford to spend a little bit and get a really significant improvement in the product. And that was something that our, sort of copycat competitors just didn't understand.
Right. I gotcha. It seems that this margin that you have gives you a bit more flexibility as well. And things back then are probably different from today, but Yeah, I know we were chatting earlier, just thinking about the tariffs that are kicking in and things like that. I'm just thinking, gosh, if you don't have a high margin and you kind of eat up that, you're not able to pass on a price to the Israeli, right? Like you may struggle if you're trying to, you're trying to, kind of play a low margin game at scale. Do you have
Yeah.
any learning when it comes to what the margin can do for you?
Yeah. I think it's exactly, what you just said. I don't know that we were necessarily smarter than anybody else, right? But what we did have was high margins. And I think we made it probably the same number of mistakes, if not more, than all of our competitors. But with high margins, we could absorb more mistakes than they could, right? And so to me, when I think about startups, companies, and particularly pricing and pricing models, there's a tendency to want to be, as a new entrant, the low cost leader, or coming in, under the incumbent's price because you think that's how, you're going to win. And I think that's certainly one strategy, but the strategy that I personally prefer, given, what I've learned, is that you really want to try to figure out what the customer wants. And when you figure that out, they'll be willing to pay a premium, right? They just want that product. And if we can build a product that they want, that they're willing to pay, we can make the same mistakes. We can make more mistakes than our competitors and still survive. And if we're lucky and everything goes well, then we can build a really awesome business, right? Where, your company's humming along, and, financially, you've got margins that support a great business. And I think you'll see that in some of the best businesses in the world. Yes, there are companies that can work on sort of thin margins, and just work on volume. But those are really, really difficult businesses. And one mistake and you could be dead.
Right.
But the vast majority of the best companies are ones that, can command a premium price.
Right, right. I love that. I mean, it gets me thinking about startups in general, where, the key thing to do before you make it big, ideally, is just to survive. And, survival, comes in different ways and forms. But, one is the founders are resilient, refuse to give up, kind of find a way to keep things going. And with the power of technology, internet, it could be a chance to generate tremendous utility and often like pretty efficient capital use. So there's always a chance. I mean, some cases the founder chooses to give up and the company's gone, right? So like it's already done. But from what you're sharing, like having some more margin and some more cash certainly gives you a bit of a buffer. And sometimes these things are very psychological, where, like you start feeling like you have less and less cash, you might feel a little bit more stressed out, might not want to extend for as long as you could otherwise. Having a little bit of a buffer that kind of takes the edge off might be the difference between giving up and continuing. Just something that you make me think about with that piece about just having extending runway, but also having more flexibility.
Yeah, extending runway, having flexibility, and again, if it all comes together in the end, and it's like lightning striking, right? Where everything is just working. Somehow you survived. You made it through. You've got a very profitable business, and those profits let you reinvest into more R&D that your competitors cannot do. And so it's this cycle that, when it's all humming, really, really works.
Yeah, totally, totally. Well, which gets us to the next part, which is but based on what you're describing, it sounds like kind of a hardware business at this point. You guys are generating revenue and pretty decent profits. So how do you turn it from that type of business to making Guitar Hero? Were you guys the developer? Were you guys the publisher? How did that play out? Come about.
Yeah, so we started off as online game rentals, as you said. We transitioned to hardware. At that time, though, our story was still we're an online game rental company, right? That's the only way we thought we could raise money from potential investors. But we were profitable. We had been profitable since our second year because of the high margins on our dance pads. And what we saw with these music games was that one, they were very universal, meaning boys, girls, young, old, everybody played. Dance Dance Revolution, particularly at that time, being the most popular game. And that was an interesting dynamic because you didn't usually see that in video games, right? Video games are typically like young male, 14 to 24. And then in particular, Dance Dance Revolution skewed just slightly more female. Again, very unusual dynamic within, games, especially at that time. And then the other interesting thing that we saw was that it was a party game. So it was the kind of game that you bring to a party or you would play at a party, right? You wouldn't bring a, Madden football or Call of Duty to, or, FIFA soccer to a party, right? Like those games just don't work. But Dance Dance Revolution was the kind of game because everybody could play, young, old, male, female, that you would bring to a party. So it was very social. We called it party games at the time. The term eventually became social when Guitar Hero came out, and then a year after that, Nintendo came out with Wii, and social games became the term. But we called it party games. So that's really interesting. So we decided to go to the publishers who made other music games, and they were all in Japan because music games originated in Japan, and that's where most of the music games were still being created. And we just wanted them to bring these music games to the U.S., like publish them in the U.S. because they only published them in Japan. And our business, because we were in hardware at the time, we just wanted to make accessories. We just wanted to make, bring your music game, we'll make the accessories. Don't worry, you don't have to worry about making the accessories for it. And so we went to the publishers, and universally they told us, well, we don't think there's a market for music games in the US. Other than Dance Dance Revolution, we don't think there's a market. So none of the publishers wanted to bring their music games over. And, when we heard that from just about every one of them, we thought, well, they're not going to do it. So if nobody's going to do it, the only way we could sort of grow and manage the growth of our company is if we try to publish a game ourselves, as software, make software, publish it. Because at that point, our hardware was dependent on, the publisher of the game, the software, to publish the game, and then we could sell hardware for it, right? So they decided, as an example, hey, 1 year we don't want to publish Dance Dance Revolution, then we're screwed, right? And so the only way to kind of control our own destiny, if you will, was we had to get into the publishing business, which was totally crazy because at the time, this was around 2004. At the time, video game publishing was consolidating. Video game publishers were consolidating. It was becoming a business of scale, right? You needed money to build big games. That was sort of the beginning of the big game era. And so they were all going away. But, we were young, we were dumb, we weren't from the industry. We were like, okay, let's just publish video games. We didn't know, what the industry dynamics were. And so that's how we got into video game publishing. So we went to we didn't have software publishing or software development internal at the time. But we found this one game called In the Groove, which was a dance game that a small developer called Rockstar Games was developing. They were based in Austin, Texas, and they were developing it for the arcade. And we were pretty interested in that game, dance game. It was, you could call it a clone of Dance Dance Revolution, but they created a different feel for it. They created it in a more Western style, so Western music rather than J-pop with Dance Dance Revolution, and different features, a little bit more social. So we went to them and we said, hey, we're interested in publishing your game on the console. They did arcade, and we were interested in, hey, can we release your game on PlayStation, Xbox, Nintendo? So we negotiated the publishing rights on the console platform. And that was the first game that we started as a publisher. So while that game was in development, and that was in early to mid 2004, we had just come off of a good holiday selling our dance pads at retail. Actually, the RedOctane Ignition dance pad was the best-selling dance pad in the U.S. at retail in that holiday. So we came off a good holiday selling accessories, and we thought, well, we're in development of this first dance game. Let's look at another game. So we approached another developer called Harmonix Music Systems, and they were based in Boston. And that'll be also an interesting segment after for people who know games. But we approached the developer Harmonix, and we said, hey, we've never been a publisher before, but we're interested in being a publisher now. This music game category is great. They had made a couple music games before, critical successes, like they got great ratings, but they were both commercial failures. They just didn't sell well. So we approached them, we liked what they did, and we said, hey, we're interested in maybe working with you to develop a game. And, we would be the publisher, which in the gaming world means, in our case, we funded the project, we did the sales, marketing, distribution. That's typically what the publisher does. In our case, it was slightly different because then we had to manufacture hardware, which is something you don't do if you're just making a pure software product. And so it took us 4 months to convince them to work with us, because they were working with much bigger companies at the time. And, here we were, startup, never published a game before, but we made, pretty cool, peripherals. So it took some time to convince them, but we finally did. And, out of that project, was born Guitar Hero. And for us, right, when we thought about, what we wanted to do, said, okay, well, we want to do a music game, right? We can work from scratch this time. We want to do a music game. We definitely wanted the accessory, right? Because that's where we were making, our money. And the thought was, okay, we want to use Western music for a music game. So if we want to make a game with Western music, with an accessory, I thought was, well, rock and roll. And if it's rock and roll, then guitar was kind of the natural, peripheral or accessory to attach to it. And so again, that was sort of how the Guitar Hero story was born.
Right. Super interesting, and great makes sense on the type of music and the type of instrument. I suspect I don't know, you guys chose something else, like a saxophone. Perhaps it wouldn't have hit as hard, like something of that nature. Cool. Well, I remember playing Guitar Hero back in the day, and then eventually there was a few other kind of comparable games, like I think one's called like Rock Band or something. I remember playing that at a later point. And I see a grin on your face. Maybe that kind of sparks something you want to share with us. But it came out like nowhere. It seemed to just kind of blow up overnight. What was the experience like for you, and what actually happened?
Yeah, I mean, it was an amazing experience. Like, we were a small company. Back in that time, we were doing about 6 million in revenue and 2 million in profits. So we have a small company, right? Still a very small startup, but very profitable because of our dance pads. We sold direct online and we sold at retail at that point. We were, selling pretty much to every retailer except Walmart at that time. Best Buy, Target, Toys R Us, we was GameStop, Electronics Boutique. We were selling in all of them at the time. So we had, pretty good distribution on our dance pads. And for us, we didn't need, a AAA title. We didn't have to make, $100 million on the product, right, to be successful. And for sure, we had no expectations about, what it would do. But we knew that we were very tapped into the music game audience. And even if we only sold to them, we would have been okay. So that first holiday that we launched, we ordered 125,000 units. And that was all we could afford. Actually, it was more than we could afford, because we had to order guitar peripherals. Software was very easy. We could push a button, and the next day, They would, Sony, Microsoft could stamp out however many discs. They could stamp out, a million discs, right? It was very easy to do that part. But if you want to make hardware, you want to make cars, you want to manufacture in China, you got to source all the components, you got to bring them all to the factory. They have to assemble the product together. They have to QA test it, pack it, ship it, which is, 3 weeks alone. Once it gets to the US, then you have to, distribute it. And that takes time. So that's a 3-4 month process. So, for us, it was a huge bet. For a big publisher, that would be nothing, right? For an Activision or an EA at the time, they wouldn't have even bothered, at that number, 105,000 units. And that was for the first holiday. What we started seeing as we got closer was that we took it to our first sort of bigger show was GameStop. They had their managers show. So every year they bring all their managers from every store around the country, and they have their own internal show. And, they do whatever they need to do. Plus they showcase new products that are coming out. And we took Guitar Hero there at the time, which was still in, development. And it was probably 80% finished at the time. And hadn't been shown, really outside. And we took it, and the GameStop managers loved it. They were lining up to play, the game. And that was one of our first signs was okay, well, that's a really good sign that, they're lining up to play, hardcore gamers are lining up to play this game and really loved it. Again, no clue, where this would, end up. But, we had a lot of trouble getting the product out the door. We eventually, almost ran out of money for a third time again, had to borrow money, had to mortgage our houses to raise enough cash because we couldn't raise VC money. We tried, but, we just couldn't raise VC money. So we did whatever we could, because, we were about to run out of money. So we got enough money to, push the product out the door, and we launched it in November of 2005. Got it on the shelf, and I still remember the story. We were originally going to ship it to all the retailers on the same day, because usually, no one wants to be last to get a new product on the shelf. We get a call from Best Buy saying, "Hey, when are you get the product to us?" I said, "Okay, well, we're going to get it to you, on November 25th." And they were like, "Well, that's too late. We had already planned that you were going to get here on, the week before." We're like, "Well, we were still relatively new to the retail game." They said, "Okay, sorry, it's going to be a week late." And they said, "Well, we're going to fine you if you don't get it here." And we said, "How much?" And they said $40,000. And we were like, "Oh my God." I mean, we were out of money, borrowing money from family, friends. And like I said, my brother and I had to mortgage house just to get about $1 million to just get the product out the door. So we didn't have $40,000 to spend.
Right.
And we're like, "Well, what are we going to do?" We said, "Okay, well, look, here's what we got to do." Products were coming in slowly because as guitars were manufactured, they're put on a container, put on a ship, shipped over, right? So it's not like they all came at once. So they're slowly dribbling in. We said, "Okay, whatever product we have to ship it to Best Buy first. And, we have to get it to them, because if we don't, they're going to find us. And we'll deal with everything else later." So we're getting product, we ship to Best Buy first. And they put it on the shelf on that Friday. And we come in, they're on the East Coast, they're in Minneapolis, and we're on the West Coast, in San Francisco. So we come into work on Monday morning. The product's been on their shelf since Friday. They're 3 hours ahead. By the time we get in the office, we've got 5 voicemails from them saying, "Hey, call us back. We got Guitar here. We put it on the shelf on Friday, and it's selling out. You need to ship us more product." And we were like, "Whoa." And then the buyer called us before lunch and said, "Hey, you really, got to get us more product." Called us after lunch and said, "Hey, we just sold 700 units over lunch, right? When are you going to ship us more product?" And we didn't tell them, that we literally had no product in the warehouse, right? that they were slowly coming in, and we still had to ship to other retailers, but they were slowly coming in. And they thought that we were playing sort of this allocation game, as we call it. Right? Like, I'm going to save these units from my favorite retailer. Like, I'm going to give it to you instead of to you, right? We were not playing any games. We just literally had no product, and it was slowly coming in. And so we said, okay, well, we'll get you some, as fast as possible. We'll replenish you as quickly as possible. That afternoon, sure enough, we get a call from GameStop, which GameStop and EB were separate at the time, and eventually GameStop bought Electronics Boutique, or EB, and then became what GameStop is today. Back then, we get a call from GameStop, and they were very aggressive retailers, and they didn't mind swearing. And so we get a call from them on the Monday afternoon, and they're like, "Hey, where the F is our Guitar Hero? We saw it on our competitor's shelf, right, already. How come we don't have ours yet?" And we're like, "Oh, crap, what are we going to tell them?" Yes, huddled together, like, okay, this is what we have to tell them, right? We told them that we got the product in our warehouse, and these are big boxes, right? It was a guitar, big box. It wasn't like a DVD case. We could overnight DVD cases. When you're on these big boxes, we can't overnight that. It costs us too high. So we'll tell them that yours is on a truck already, which, of course, nothing was on a truck. But we'll tell them it's on a truck, and it's going to take another, 4 or 5 business days to get to your warehouse. And the reason Best Buy got theirs first on the shelf was because they came to our warehouse and picked it up. And of course, that was a white lie. They did not come to our warehouse and pick it up. But that was the only thing we could think of to tell them. And based on that one white lie, after that, every single retailer, once they got it and it started selling out, when we said it would take, 5 to 7 days to ship to you, they said, "No, we can't wait that long. We're going to come to your warehouse and we'll just pick it up." And we probably saved about $4 or $5 million in shipping costs over the next year. Just because every retailer said, "Look, we're just going to come to your warehouse. Tell us where it is, and we're just going to pick up the product."
Right. That's awesome. I mean, this there's such ingenuity, resourcefulness when it comes to founders facing dire situations. Which in your case, I suppose was a nice problem to have. There's demand, but I didn't realize that not only did you get the products to Best Buy, but you also get people to come pick up the product themselves. That's incredible.
Yeah. It was amazing. And we were able to do that, for the first, year and a half, because we were a small company, right? We were not a big publisher like an Activision or EA. We literally could not afford to do things like that, even if we wanted to. And so, when we told them, we just can't, luckily we had a hot product and they were willing to accommodate us. So then we got it into retail, that holiday, and it was, in all the major retailers. And of course it was selling out, as fast as we could make the product. And because there was a hardware component to it, I'll come back to the hardware supply chain and logistics. It takes 3 months. When I push the button and say, "Hey, I want more," it's a 3 months lag. So, how do you forecast your demand 3 months from now? It's easy to forecast today, but what if in 3 months demand completely dries up? Or what if it stays really high? And so that's why with hot products, you're always seeing demand, right? Shortages. It's not because we want shortages. It's because we're always having to try to forecast demand 3 months out. Right. And you're always worried that if you over forecast and, oh, dang, it might have sold today, but 3 months later it won't sell, right? That's a big financial risk. So, we're cranking and trying to increase our factory production. They're hiring people, right? You can imagine what it would take to crank up production. It's not like, again, pushing a button or software where you just produce another unit. No, you actually need physical factory floor space, has to be cleared, allocated, has to be set up to produce what you want to set up. People have to be hired and trained to make the product and QA it, package it, and do all that stuff. And you have to source more components and new components. So it just takes time to scale up. So we were scaling up as fast as we could, and the product was, continuing to sell out. And we heard a couple of interesting, stories at during that holiday. The first story was that, they were, someone at Sony PlayStation had reserved the conference room and set up Guitar Hero, and they were just playing Guitar Hero all the time. Literally just set it up in the conference room, and all day long they were just, people were just playing Guitar Hero. And then the second story that was interesting that we heard was that we had launched it at that point originally just on the PlayStation platform, and then we had sort of in short order released it on Xbox, but originally it was just on PlayStation. And then the second interesting story we heard was that that they were playing the game up at Nintendo. And because we didn't release it on a PlayStation, that means they were buying PlayStations, bringing them into the Nintendo headquarters, and were playing it on, Sony PlayStations. And so that was kind of interesting to us. So you could start to sense at least there was excitement. But again, how big this would become. Nobody knew. We made 125,000 units the first holiday, right? At that time, big AAA titles were selling 3 million units on the first day. And, we had 125,000 units for the first, month and a half. So still a dribble compared to, big AAA titles.
Yeah. In retrospect, did that help you some? Because sometimes when a product is more exclusive, there's a layer kind of brand effect around it. Did that play a factor at all? And, like what happened the following year? How many did you sell? How'd you guys scale up further that year?
Yeah, I think absolutely shortages, right, sort of create this illusion of demand, or maybe it's not an illusion of demand, but it amplifies that demand, right? Because, hey, I want to get it, I can't get it. Okay, I'm going to look for it, and as soon as I find it, I'm going to grab it because I can't find it, and that's just a cycle that kind of feeds on itself. So I think there's no question that, there was a benefit from Guitar Hero for that aspect of it. And it was a party game. I come back to that, right? It was the kind of game you could bring to a party. And so there was virality built into the product. I go to a party, all of a sudden 20, 30 people, play it and know about it and want to buy it. And so that really helped us, honestly, for the first 4 years, we did not catch up to demand for the first 4 years of the product. Every year, we would up our forecasts. So the first 12 months of Guitar Hero, this is the 12 months before we were acquired by Activision, we did 50 million in sales, and almost all, 45 million of that was Guitar Hero. And that was done within about 6 months, right? And so then we got acquired by, Activision. And then we were trying to forecast the next year. So, okay, well, we had, the next version of it at least. So, okay, well, we did about, 50, 75 million on that first game. How much could we sell on the second game, right? Oh, nobody knows, right? Like, oh God. We said, okay, well, we came out roughly with a forecast that would double, 75. Okay, we think we could do 150 million next year. And I'm thinking, holy cow, how are we gonna double this in sales from 75 to 150? Like, how do you even do that, right? I'm still a startup guy. And so the next year we ended up doing 300 million, right? That year, instead of 150, which was our forecast, we ended up doing 300 million. And that was, double our forecast. And then by the third year, in the third version of the game, we had to, again, estimate, well, how much are we going to sell Guitar Hero 3? And we said, well, we did 300 million of, last year, and primarily Guitar Hero 2. How much could we possibly do the next year? And so at 300, I think we did, roughly a very slight increase, right? We said, okay, well, we think maybe we could do 400 million, maybe 500, but I don't think, the reality is there's a chance like most franchises go down, right? And so, we were kind of trying to be conservative. But that next year, Guitar Hero 3, we did $1 billion. So forecasting, 400 or 500, and we ended up doing $1 billion. And it wasn't really until, Guitar Hero 4, I mentioned the fourth version of the product, which is when, we finally started to sort of quote unquote catch up with demand, right? And that year we did $1.6 billion. So, we grew from 50 million in the first year of the franchise to roughly 300 million to, $1 billion to, $1.6 billion within, 4 years. And it was crazy, the rocket ship, that's the nature of gaming and hits-driven businesses. And gaming is certainly a hits-driven business. But, if you'd asked us again, going back to the question at the beginning, did we know what Guitar Hero was going to do when we were building Guitar Hero 1? I mean, this would have been, absolutely outside the realm of anybody's dream at that time. We would not have even been able to dream, of a game that could do that.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, for sure. And I'm kind of largely aware of the Guitar Hero business. I know we've chatted a couple of times. I wasn't aware of the scale of the revenue generation. And you mentioned that was from 2005 to 2009, was it? Those 4 years?
Yeah, 2005 to 2009. And, honestly, there's a lot of things that I didn't know, until in retrospect. Guitar Hero was the fastest game to $1 billion in video game history. The franchise did it in 22 months. It was the biggest selling game of the decade, 2000 to 2010. And it was the highest grossing video game of all time. Guitar Hero 3 was. It sold $1 billion, that version. It held the reign for 6 years until Call of Duty broke the record. But
Right.
What's amazing about Call of Duty is we had hardware to sell on top, so we got hardware revenue. Call of Duty only sold software, so actually that's quite an amazing feat that they managed to catch up and beat that record.
Right.
But yeah, it was quite a sort of a rocket ship.
Yeah, yeah. For sure. That's incredible. Although you mentioned Activision, and if I recall, RedOctane was acquired by Activision in the mid 2000s. Was that 2005 or 6? It seemed fairly shortly after you guys launched Guitar Hero.
Yeah, we were acquired about 8 months after we launched the game. So that was in 2006.
Really?
Yeah, November of 2006. Yeah.
Okay. Well, let's hear more about that entire saga. I guess a couple of things that come to mind. Just kind of how did it come about, and why did you want to sell RedOctane? It sounds like company was doing pretty well. You guys were generating revenue and profits as well. And when you say from 15 million to 1.6 billion dollars, I mean, you didn't know it at the time, but there's a lot more runway to go, a lot more to go when it comes to this product. So, how did this acquisition come about?
Yeah, that also, is an interesting story. M&A stories by themselves are always quite interesting. So rewind the clock back to 2005, the beginning of 2006. We launched the product in November of 2005, and this is January of 2006. So about 2 months later, I'm at CES, the Consumer Electronics Show, and I get a call while I'm there. And I pick up the call, and it, a person says, "Hi, this is Ron Dornick from Activision." And, I'm still from the periphery of the game industry, right? I don't know the players, and I don't know it that well. But I recognize that name. Ron Dornick was the president of Activision, president and CEO at Activision at the time. I said, okay, well, that's an interesting call, right? We were at that time not interested in selling it, at all. The game, was doing well for us. We were profitable already. The game made us more profitable. we were never able to raise VC money before that. But once we launched the game, then we were able to get VC interest, of course, right? And so we were talking to some VCs, but I said, "Hey, Ron, I'm at CES, but happy to meet with you. So when I'm back, happy to meet." And he's like, "Okay, sure, I'll fly up to meet you guys in the San Francisco Bay Area." They were based in LA. So the week after, they flew up, and they flew up under the guise of being the Orchid Men, Orchid being the extinguishing company. That's how they introduced themselves, and they did that because they obviously don't want to spark any attention from any employee that, hey, the CEO of Activision was coming to talk to us, because when that typically happens, people, employees, at the startup start to wonder, whoa, what's going on? So they came in as the Orchid Men. And, we had our meeting, they said, "Hey, how can we help you?" We said, "Well, we launched the game. We don't honestly need any help because we were already looking at European distribution and talking to a potential partner to distribute our product in Europe because we only distributed in North America at the time. We sold direct to all the retailers. Because of our dance pad business, we were already selling direct. We didn't have to go through a middleman, a distributor, which is very typical for a small company. But, we worked really hard to build those direct relationships. So I said, well, we don't necessarily need any help. And then that was when their conversation shifted. Okay, well, how about acquisition? And it turned out, we didn't know at that time, they only told us after the acquisition, but it turned out that the reason they even knew and came up to talk to us was that during the holiday season, every video game publisher wants to ship their game, right? Nobody wants to ship the game in January. It's like, we got to ship for Christmas. So all the publishers, they ship their games, and then they have these QA departments. And after, the games are shipped, the QA departments have really nothing to do. So at Activision, one of the senior execs was walking through the QA department during this time, and he noticed that they were all playing this game. And he said, "Well, what are you guys playing?" And he said, "Well, we're playing Guitar Hero." So, all the people in their QA department were playing Guitar Hero, and that's when they took notice. And that's what eventually led to the call, to us and to talk. So we tried to raise money before, we couldn't, but now we were talking to a couple of VCs, and we had term sheets on the table to raise money. And they came in with their first offer, and we said, thanks, but no thanks. And every month I would just forward them our sales data. And so from January to February, I forward them our sales data, and every month our sales, were going up because we were getting more guitars in, we slowly increasing production. So every month our sales were creeping up. And they came in with another offer, and we said, thanks, but no thanks. And then by end of April, somewhere in April of that year, 2006, they finally came in with their third offer. And, by then it was sort of, we had to take a harder look. And the advice that, we got from, one of our advisors, and some things I learned in retrospect also myself, but one of the things, our advisor said was, look, you just got to pick a number. You got to pick a number. And he's a longtime entrepreneur, started and sold several companies, and pick a number. I didn't quite understand all the nuance and the meaning back then. It was only after that I understood how important that process was. I think the first thing about his advice, pick a number, is, well, most of the time we don't pick a number as entrepreneurs. We don't think like, okay, we're going to sell it. I'm going to sell my company at this price. We just kind of think, hey, we're going to build a great product, we're going to build an awesome business, and yeah, somebody's going to come in and and then we'll sell it. But you don't never really think about it. And that forces you to also think about, well, what do I want financially? Right? Am I happy with making a little bit of money? Am I happy with being financially independent? Or like, no, I want to be able to buy a $300 million yacht one day, right? And that's what I'm waiting for. So, and we don't really, as entrepreneurs, generally don't think about that either, right? So it kind of forces you to think about, well, roughly what am I looking for? Or what would I be satisfied with? And then the last part of that, of picking a number, I think maybe even the most important was that it starts to instill financial discipline, because it's as with all things related to pricing, it's very emotionally charged, right? It's like buying a stock. If you buy it and it's Tesla and it's riding high, I'm not going to sell. It's going to go higher. It's going to go higher. It's going to go higher. And that's sort of emotional buying. Disciplined financial managers will have an entry price and an exit price, and they will enter and exit at those prices, right? As an entrepreneur, you're going through an M&A process. You may think, oh, how my sales going up? I don't want to sell. It's too low, right? The price, our sales continue to climb. And so picking a number also helps to instill a bit of that financial discipline.
Right.
And so that's what, my brother and I did based on the advice, very good advice of, our mentor and advisor. And we kind of picked the price, and, Activision got to that price, it was $100 million with a, really nice earnout on top of that, and said, okay, well, they got to a price. It's time to sell. And that was when we decided to sell the company.
Right. It's a pretty great outcome for you and your brother and the team when you guys raised $1.8 million and we're trying to rent out video games and sell dance pads and all that. So pretty good. I mean, what was $100 million back then? Like comparable today, like 10 billion? Like how much capital is going around these days?
Yeah, it's I sort of make the analogy that startups and valuations are like sports. When you think about like, wow, how much did a top athlete make 20 years ago versus what a top athlete is making today? I mean, the athlete might have been better in those days, but holy cow, the salaries are just not even comparable, right? And so, yeah, we were, very happy. And, another outcome and a lesson, that I learned was that, we ended up taking the majority of the deal in stock. And, it doesn't always work out this way. But, we were lucky again. And, over the course of the next, 8 to 10 years, maybe a little bit less, Activision stock went up by 10x. And so by that point, my brother and I joking, man, we worked so hard to get this company and sell it at $100 million. And then we did almost nothing and sat around, and, the value of that stock, if you had held on to everything, turned into $1 billion, right? But we worked so hard for that first bit. And so that was a very interesting learning. I'm not saying it's the right move to take stock, but it was just a very interesting, sort of learning lesson.
Yeah, for sure. I noticed a couple of things from this. One is that it seems like both parties benefited from that deal. You guys, built a great product, got the number that you're looking for, and got upside on the stock. And for Activision, multiple years of $1 billion of sales from this product, and they paid $100 million for it. That's a pretty great value exchange there on both sides.
Yeah.
Another thought comes to mind is, you've mentioned a few times that you got pretty lucky, really you got fortunate, you didn't know this was going to happen, or you guys were like young and dumb and all of that. And totally respect the humility, but it's kind of interesting because I feel like met a couple of founders that kind of describe it that way. So either people like Kevin Lin, we know pretty well, or some others are just extremely lucky all the time, or there's something else going on there. It kind of makes me feel like it's probably like a series of micro decisions that kind of like add up over time and doesn't always work out, but you got to consistently do something a certain way. I wonder what your take is on that. Like, why do you think you have all this luck?
Yeah, the way I think about, you know, startups and business, and certainly in my experience, and my personal and what I've seen around me with my friends and people, the analogy that I like to use is that it's a lot like playing poker. And what do I mean? Well, in poker, there's a big element of luck, right? And some people will say that, um, the majority of it's luck. I mean, the cards are not going your way. They're not going your way, right? And that's true. Um, but I will say that the more you prepare and the better you try to be at the game, the better your luck seems to always be, right? Now, at the end of the day, once you push in, it's up to the gods and it's up to luck, right? Like we can't control that part of it. But the harder the work that I put in, the more work that I put in, the smarter the decisions that I make based on what I've learned, ultimately that luck tends to go your way. But it still is luck at the end of the day. And that's how I tend to think about it, right? Another way to say it, some people will say, the harder you work, the more luck you get.
Right.
Right. And that's definitely, the game of poker, right? The harder you work, the more lucky you're going to get. And that's business. Like we can only control so much, but just because we can only control so much doesn't mean we sort of throw our hands up in the air and say, well, I can't control so many things, right? No, you have to get as much control of everything as you can where you can control it and leave the rest to luck, right? At that point, you have to do everything you can get to that last point. And until you get to that last point, you're fighting hard and you're working hard and you're trying to make the right decisions and you're learning and you're applying your learnings.
Right. Totally. Totally. Makes sense. Love that. And the other variable that comes to mind there is the earlier point you made about surviving. So I suppose if you're dead and you can't really like access such luck, but if you keep working, make the right decisions, I survive, and sometimes things are going to go your way. So,
Yeah, survival is everything in startups, right? When we were starting RedOctane, one of our good friends, he was a college friend of mine. He had started a company early on and sold it to Netscape. This is really early on, like 97. And then Netscape got acquired by AOL before his deal even closed. So they sold for 60 million. And before they finalized the paperwork and did everything, the stock went from 60 million to $220 million. So they didn't do anything and made like an extra $160 million just in that like 6 to 8 months between when those two transactions happened. But his advice when we first started was, Kai, you just got to hang on. You just got to hang on, right? And it's that kind of, you hear about this from, a lot of VCs in particular. It's that cockroach mentality. You got to be like a cockroach. You can't die. You just got to stay alive, because if you stay alive, you have another chance, right? And all you got to do is figure out how to stay alive. And there's some founders, it's some of it is grit and tenacity, right? That's important, critical. And some of it, comes back to this idea that there's luck, right? That we talked about, that some people will say, it's luck, but hey, those cockroaches, those tenacious entrepreneurs did everything they had to do to get to that point. Whereas most, quite honestly, entrepreneurs don't know how or are not willing to take everything to that point, right? Or they think it's just, well, hey, they got lucky. Well, they did get lucky, but they did probably 50% more work or made better decisions to get to that luck.
totally. Totally. Yeah, I agree with all of that. And I think, we're talking about from a founder's perspective, if you kind of flip it back to the venture side, maybe like spend a little bit of time on that because I know you spent time investing as well. Something that comes to my mind is, you know, I've kind of heard this from a really great mentor of mine. I'm sure I've mentioned him many times in the future too. But he told me he's like venture capital investing, very different from hedge funds, obvious reasons too. But in some other areas, you want to make money. In venture capital, yes, you want to make money, but you don't really go into backing folks that want to make money. Meaning that if the founders like just want to find a thing to make money, if it doesn't work well, they're probably going to give up. And also, if they purely focus on making money, they might make decisions that alter or lessen the product experience. So you want to go for people that really care about what they're trying to build because they're not trying to make money per se. It's more about a mission. It's the sort of thing they want to accomplish long term. Only way for them to, kind of keep at it when things are getting tough and they want to give up, or, there's less cash, they want to give up, some other action they want to give up, something happens, they want to give up. There's all these reasons why they should give up. And, they just stick with it. They're very stubborn. You make me think about that. And I'm conscious of your time here. I think we're a bit over our hour. But, one of the things I want to ask you was just more about what you're spending your time on these days. What's top of mind for you? What are you looking at? What kind of companies are you supporting and or investing into? Love to get a sense of that.
Yeah, so nowadays I'm working on a couple of things. One of them is 886 Studios, and that's a venture studio and a accelerator program that's based in Taiwan. And what we do right now, actually, we have a new program, Ikigai, that we just kicked off in collaboration with Lifelike Capital, which is a VC fund. We're actually collaborating on doing an accelerator program together because our missions align very well. But we're working with startup teams because, we're all founders or investors, and we love working with other founders and want to, see, where we have fit and where we can help them, because, we were all there once. And I mentioned sort of at the beginning of the podcast that, I was born in Taiwan. And so this accelerator is actually, and venture studio is actually based in Taiwan. And all of the founding partners are Taiwanese, have some, tied to Taiwan. And so not only are we interested in, working with founders and startups and tech, because that's where all of our backgrounds are, but we're also, one of our other missions is that we're interested in, helping the Taiwan startup ecosystem. So we're spending a lot of time working with Taiwan startups, and helping them, go global, go international markets, which is again where we as partners have more experience in. And it's been, a very rewarding process to be able to, work with founders here and also to understand and learn about the dynamics here and how they're different than Silicon Valley, which is where all of us have, been or, or are still are.
Right. Right. Yeah. Very, very exciting effort. And, I myself spent some time in Taiwan and had a sense of the local landscapes and the founders there as investors. I think it's a great effort to incubate and help some of these startup teams. It's probably, something we can cover during a future session. There's plenty to talk about Taiwan-wise and startups there. We'll end today with one final question, which is kind of a one and a half question, which is anything you'd like to share with our audience that we haven't covered just yet. And if you could share something about yourself that most people don't know about, as you please, Kai.
Good couple of questions to wrap it up. Anything else to share? One thing I will say as an entrepreneur, who started 5 companies now, is that it never gets easier. It gets a little bit easier, but boy, startups are always tough. And every time I do another one, I remind myself, why am I doing this? It's so tough. But I do it because I love it. I know that's why I do it. But it's such a tough grind, and it's amazing, all these passionate entrepreneurs, founders, and people just have so much energy and enthusiasm to pursue, being in a startup, building a startup. So that kind of energy is something that I feed off of. And again, one of the reasons why, starting 886 Studios was a very important thing and sort of passion, for me. What is one thing that people wouldn't know about me? I would say the one thing that tends to surprise most people is I love to cook. And I'm not tooting my own horn, but I'm not bad. And I loved it. I loved like cooking and food aspect. Not necessarily eating when I was younger. I love to eat now, but when I was younger, when I was in junior high and high school, actually back then, if you asked me what I wanted to do, I would have said I want to be a chef. And this was back in the days before like celebrity chefs, right? So I would have been just another chef toiling in the back. But somehow life took me in a different direction. And, again, probably because of my dad, wanting to start a business, one day. And I took a completely different turn from wanting to be a chef, but that was what I was interested in at the time. And, I still have a passion. Maybe I'll come back to that as retirement.
Right. Awesome. I didn't know that about you. Maybe you can bring was that Korean show? It was very popular, Culinary Class Wars. You're
Yeah,
gonna Taiwan, all the local Taiwan delicacies and pineapple cakes and the beef noodles and all that good stuff. And
I love it.
yeah, cool. Well, thanks so much for your time, Kai. Super interesting, insightful, and learn a lot of nuggets that I haven't heard from you yet. Like, I know I met you a couple of times, listened to some of your other podcasts and interviews as well. So I'm glad that, get the full story and some other insights here. Thanks again for coming onto the show. You're welcome anytime. And, can't wait to share this with all our friends and audience members around the world.
Well, great, Adam. I had a great time. Hope your listeners pick one or two good or fun things from this. And always happy to be on the show again.
So, sounds good. Thanks, Kai. All right. You have a great day. Catch you later.
All right. Thank you.